Nobody hit you. Nobody screamed at you. On the surface, your childhood looked fine. But there was something quieter happening. Something that left no marks you could point to. You were there, but not really seen. Your feelings were brushed off. Your needs were inconvenient. When you were upset, you were told to stop being so sensitive. When you were excited, no one really cared. Not abuse. Not neglect in the dramatic sense. Just not enough. And the strange thing about that kind of childhood is this: it's the hardest kind to make sense of as an adult, because nothing terrible happened. So you tell yourself you're fine, you tell yourself other people had it worse, you feel guilty even calling it difficult. But your nervous system doesn't care about those distinctions. It just recorded what happened, and it built a whole set of patterns around it. Patterns that are probably still running today. That's what this video is about. To understand why being ignored as a child has such lasting effects, you need to understand something about how the human brain develops. When you're young, especially in the first few years of life, your brain is not yet built. It's building itself in real time based on the experiences you have and the responses you get. Specifically, your nervous system is learning the answers to some fundamental questions. Am I safe? Do my feelings matter? Can I trust the people around me? Am I worth paying attention to? These aren't abstract philosophical questions. They're wired in through thousands of small daily moments. A parent who notices when you're sad, who responds when you cry, who asks what's wrong, who shows interest in what you care about. Psychologists call these moments attunement, when a carer's responses match and validate a child's inner world. And research shows that consistent attunement is one of the most important things a child's developing brain needs. When attunement is missing, when your inner world is consistently met with indifference, dismissal, or absence, the brain learns something specific: my inner world is not important. This becomes a foundational belief, not a thought you choose, a pattern wired into the architecture of how you process yourself and the world. And that pattern shows up in very predictable ways in adult life. The first pattern is one of the most common and one of the most invisible. If you grew up being ignored, you learnt early that your needs were inconvenient, that asking for things led to dismissal, irritation, or simply nothing. So you stopped asking. You learned to handle things yourself, to not bother people, to manage your emotions privately, quietly, without making a fuss. And in many ways that looked like a strength. You were low maintenance, easy, independent. But underneath it, something else was happening. You weren't just becoming self-sufficient. You were learning that your needs don't count. As an adult, this pattern shows up in ways like feeling guilty when you ask for help, minimizing your problems when people ask how you're doing, struggling to know what you actually need in relationships, feeling like you're too much, and simultaneously feeling completely unseen. The hardest part? You often don't even realize your needs are being minimized because dismissing them became so automatic that you do it to yourself before anyone else gets the chance. The second pattern runs even deeper. One of the things a responsive parent does, almost without knowing it, is help a child name what they're feeling. You're feeling sad. That made you angry, didn't it? I can see you're frustrated. This sounds simple, but it's doing something crucial. It's teaching the child that their emotions are real, recognizable, and speakable, that feelings have names, that the internal experience of being human can be understood and communicated. When this is missing, when a child's emotions are consistently ignored or dismissed, they grow up with a kind of emotional blindness about themselves. Psychologists call this alexithymia, difficulty identifying and describing your own emotions. And it's strongly associated with childhood emotional neglect. As an adult, it looks like this. You know something feels off, but you can't name what it is. You feel a vague, persistent discomfort that you can't locate. Someone asks how you're feeling and you genuinely don't know. You default to your thoughts instead. I think instead of I feel. And because you can't identify what's happening inside you, it becomes very hard to get your needs met, or to ask for what you want, or to even know, in an honest way, who you are. If your needs weren't met consistently, you learned something as a child. The emotional state of the adults around you mattered more than your own. You became a reader of rooms, an expert in other people's moods. You learnt to scan, almost unconsciously, for signs of tension displeasure, and irritation. And you learn to adjust yourself accordingly. Are they in a good mood today? Is this a safe moment to ask, are they okay? Do they seem upset? This is sometimes called the fawn response. Not fight, not flight, but fawn, monitor, and appease. Stay safe by making sure the people around you are okay. In childhood, it was adaptive. It was how you navigated an environment where your needs depended on other people's emotional state. But in adult life, this hypervigilance becomes exhausting. You spend enormous mental energy tracking other people. You take responsibility for moods that have nothing to do with you. You feel anxious in any relationship where you sense the other person might be upset, even when it has nothing to do with you. And over time, you lose the thread of your own emotional state entirely, because you've spent so long focused outward that you've stopped checking inward. This is the one that lives deepest. When a child is ignored, when their emotions are dismissed, their presence is overlooked, and their inner world is treated as unimportant, the child's developing brain makes a very logical, very painful conclusion. There must be something wrong with me. Children are not yet capable of thinking, my parent is emotionally unavailable. They don't have the framework for that. Instead, they do what children do. They make it about themselves. I must not be interesting enough. I must not be lovable enough. I must not be worth paying attention to. This becomes a core belief, a foundational assumption about the self that runs beneath conscious thought and colors every relationship. As an adult, it shows up as a persistent feeling that you are somehow less than others, that if people truly knew you, they would leave. That love is conditional. Something you have to earn, not something you deserve to simply receive. It shows up in relationships where you unconsciously pick partners who are emotionally distant, because that feels familiar, where you work harder and harder to prove your worth and never quite believe it, no matter how much evidence you accumulate. And here's the difficult truth. This belief is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of what a child did with an experience they couldn't make sense of. The fifth pattern is subtler, and it goes in two different directions depending on the person. Some people who grew up being ignored become intensely comfortable with solitude, sometimes too comfortable. Being alone was safe. Being alone meant not needing anything from anyone, not risking rejection, not making demands that would go unmet. Solitude became a refuge, and so as adults they withdraw when stressed. They self-isolate. They insist they don't need people, and they often believe it, while feeling an aching loneliness underneath that they can't explain. Others go the opposite direction. They become intensely uncomfortable with being alone. Any silence in a relationship feels like abandonment. Any moment without connection triggers anxiety. They seek constant reassurance, constant contact, because being alone means being invisible again. Both patterns come from the same root, a childhood where the experience of being unseen was so painful that it fundamentally changed how safe being alone, or not alone, feels. What both groups share is this, an uneasy relationship with the space between connection and solitude, never quite comfortable in either direction for long. Here's what I want to leave you with. All 5 of these patterns, minimizing your needs, not knowing your feelings, reading everyone else's moods, feeling fundamentally unlovable, and the complicated relationship with solitude, were adaptations. They weren't weaknesses, they weren't failures. They were the most intelligent responses a child's brain could make to the environment it found itself in. The child who learned not to ask for things was protecting themselves from the pain of being dismissed. The child who couldn't name their feelings was surviving in a world where naming them led nowhere. The child who became hypervigilant to other people's moods was keeping themselves safe. The child who decided they were unlovable was making sense of an experience that was genuinely confusing. These patterns were built for a world that no longer exists. And here's what neuroscience tells us. The brain that learned these patterns can unlearn them. Not perfectly, not overnight, but genuinely. Through awareness, through relationships that provide what the early ones didn't, through the slow, patient work of teaching your nervous system that it's safe to need things, that your feelings are real and worth naming, that you are, and were always, worth paying attention to. The fact that you're watching a video called The Psychology of People Who Were Ignored as Children means something. It means the part of you that was ignored is still trying to understand what happened, still trying to be seen. That's not a wound, that's a beginning. If any of this resonated, if you recognized yourself in one of these patterns or in all of them, I want you to know that recognition is the first step, not fixing, not changing overnight. Just seeing it. Drop it in the comments if this video felt like it was written for you. And if there's someone in your life you think needs to hear this, share it with them. Next week, I'm going to cover something closely connected to this: why you always feel tired, even when nothing is physically wrong, and how much of what we call exhaustion is actually the weight of unmet emotional needs. Subscribe so you don't miss it. I'll see you there.